Japs came in. These kamikazes with satchel charges, and all hell broke loose. There was firing, and pretty soon I heard a great big boom. We were all shooting. I was shooting out the window. The next morning, we went out and found this Jap all blown to hell and gone. They had hit the satchel charge. That was all that one night. We killed quite a few.
On September 2nd, 1945, the Japanese signed the instrument of unconditional surrender aboard the USS Missouri. Prior to this, Japanese forces had largely chosen to either take their own lives or fight until the end. However, on August 28, 1945, something amazing happened. The entire Japanese garrison willingly chose to surrender to Major General William Howard Arnold. Hi, I'm Cole Kennedy. Join me as we explore the life of the man who made this incredible historical event happen.
William Howard Arnold was born on January 18, 1901 in Dyersburg, Tennessee, to Lockie Dufford Arnold and Luther Coleman Arnold. His father was a hard-working railroad man who wanted all of his children to get a good education. However, it was the Tennessee countryside that arguably had the biggest impact on William's life. It was this freedom that allowed him to develop his pioneer spirit, which would give him his lifelong sense of adventure. Unfortunately, his pioneer spirit didn't always keep him in his parents' good graces. In fact, his sense of adventure got him expelled from a military academy for insubordination when he attempted to enlist in the U.S. Army when the United States entered World War I in 1917. Despite this challenge, he was able to secure his congressman's nomination for the West Point class of 1924.
During his time at West Point, General Arnold would meet an individual who would play a major role in his future military career, future Lieutenant General Oscar Griswold.
Your premier assignment prior to the war, which was the 15th Infantry, which happened to be in China. And this gave him experience in the Orient and Asia. He also had the opportunity to be the aide-de-camp for General Griswold. So there was a very close relationship between Asia and Griswold. And one must realize at that time that the Army was going from 250,000. It was going to increase in size 20 times. So the few officers that were there had great opportunity to be promoted as long as they were competent. Father had both the Asian experience and the fact that he'd been the aide to General Griswold. Now he was one of the staff officers. He would become the chief of staff of the Griswold's Corps, and that got him into later on being promoted to general officer and basically getting the opportunity to command a division during World War II.
After he graduated from West Point, General Arnold was assigned to the 6th Infantry Regiment at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. Shortly after he arrived, he attended a tea dance where he met the love of his life, Elizabeth Welsh Mullen.
Dad's first assignment was Jefferson Barracks, and Mother, well, actually was a debutante there, and they would go down for dances with the officers, and that's how they met. When you graduate from West Point, you were an officer and a gentleman.
The Americal Division traces its roots to an infantry task force known as Task Force 6814. This task force was formed in mid-January 1942 under then Brigadier General Alexander Patch. On March 12, 1942, this task force was tasked with occupying the French colony of New Caledonia to prevent Japanese forces from seizing the island. It was on New Caledonia that Task Force 6814 was redesignated as the Americal Division.
The Americal Division would later go on to fight on islands across the South Pacific before coming under the command of then Brigadier General William Howard Arnold in November of 1944. Under his leadership, the Americal would continue to fight in cleanup operations across the South Pacific before being assigned to Operation Victor II. Their key objective in this operation was the liberation of the Philippine Island of Cebu.
It was very combat experience. They had been to Guadalcanal to replace the Marines. They had been to Bougainville. After Guadalcanal, they had to go to Fiji for a while because of the malaria and everything else. But very combat ready, lots of experience. And as General MacArthur once said, what the Americal did is a very prime example of how light infantry can operate and be successful.
Starting with the invasion of Pialolu by the 1st Marine Division in September 1944, the Japanese radically changed their tactics. Prior to that time, the Japanese would try to stop invasions at the water edge. The landing troops are coming, they had large forces on the beaches trying to throw the invading forces back. But because of the Americans' vast superior firepower in terms of destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, and air support, these suffered crippling losses with these tactics. So at Pialolu, they decided they would do something different. Instead of trying to defend the beaches themselves, they would go into highlands far beyond the beaches and draw the American forces in, which would get them away from some of the American superior firepower, and by digging in and having heavy fortifications, try to draw as many casualties upon the American invading forces they could.
The Japanese knew they could not hold Cebu City. They rapidly went up the Babag Ridge before we even landed in Cebu, and they prepared immense preparations. When we were there in 2015, we went into some of those caves that they dug. Great firing positions overlooking the coastal area. The Japanese would have lost too many soldiers trying to man beach defenses or even inland a little bit. Those large guns from the ships could reach inland quite a bit. And so what they decided to do is have a token resistance and just pull back through Cebu City and get up on Babag Ridge, where they held the advantage of the high ground. And there were some mines and booby traps on the beach and further inland, but not a lot, which tells me that they probably at the last minute decided that this is not going to work, and then they pulled back. Had they put more mines and booby traps on the beach and going inland, they would have taken a lot more American casualties, but they didn't. Once we landed on the beach and we moved inland a little bit, it was just a short jaunt to Cebu City. Inside of Cebu City, a number of the large government buildings were turned into torture places. One university we were at, there was a second floor balcony. We actually stepped out on there. We looked down at the students who were playing basketball at the time. And our guide said, well, during the war, they would take all the prisoners there on the ground, and the Japanese would say, okay, the following people are going to die tonight. And they'd read off their names, and the rest of you we'll get to later. And when we got there, there was no Japanese were there. The Japanese had taken the mayor, all the city officials, and retreated up the Babag Ridge to prepare for the main fighting. The emplacements dug in well on Babag Ridge. The entree to Babag Ridge was through Gochan Hill, and that was manned by Japanese, but it didn't take us long to get past them. So Babag Ridge ran from north to south along the island, and so we were on the eastern side lined up, and then they were up there on the ridge. So we only had 2 regiments to attack Babag Ridge, and we did the very best we could. We had gunfire from the ships and everything else, but the ridge was just too long, and we just didn't have enough troops. And General Arnold said, I can't do this without that 3rd regiment. And what he did is the 2 regiments on there, the island, had the enemy fixed on Babag Ridge. So he put the 164th Regiment down to the south, and they came around from behind and just swept right up on the ridge. And that's what drove the Japanese out. The fighting on Cebu continued on, and we took more control. We took over Babag Ridge, and the Japanese up there on the ridge, what they did is they slaughtered all of the Filipinos that ran the city. They didn't take them with them, just killed them. And then they started moving north on the island. And at that point in time, we went after them. And that's when the Filipino division started to come together again, because we had the Japanese on the run. And so once we got up to the northern part, we knew that it's just a matter of time the Japanese would have to surrender. That's when the Filipino division really came into its own and started acting as a separate military force. And we helped them. If they needed help we would send a battalion to help them, and they continued the pursuit of the Japanese further north because they knew the island. Once the Japanese invaded Cebu, the 82nd Philippine Division basically became a guerrilla force. They weren't a division as such anymore. So they floated into the interlands and started guerrilla operations. What the Americal used them for, because they knew the island very well, they used them as scouts. They used them as security on the flanks to give us plenty of time to know if the Japanese were trying to flank us. The guerrillas on Cebu killed more Japanese than on the Big Island because they had very little place to run. Well, once we got up north, about 32 miles north of Cebu, which is more or less where the surrender would eventually take place, we knew we had the Japanese on the run. We had killed a lot of them. And it's an interesting anomaly. The intelligence reports said initially that there were about 4,000 to 5,000 Japanese on the island. And so General Arnold said, okay, we can handle that with our firepower and everything else. Well, as it turned out, on the main island in Manila and Luzon, the Japanese were losing badly. And so the only place that they could retreat to in short order was Cebu. And so they were coming on Cebu on the northern part of the island, not where we landed. And as it turned out, instead of 4,000 or 5,000, there were close to 10,000 or 11,000 Japanese on the island. And we never knew that. And yet we defeated them. We were told, you will be in the invasion of Japan. And if they lasted more than 3 days, they were going to get picked up. That's how bad they expected it to be.
After the bombs were dropped, the decision was made by the emperor for the surrender. That word had to get out to all of the Japanese units. They had not received anything that said that the Japanese had surrendered. So that's why those notifications were put out there. They didn't believe it, and then they were given a radio and they did the research and said, yep, Japan has surrendered. Arthur wanted the stage show of having the formal surrender of all Japanese forces on the Missouri in Tokyo Bay. But in Father's case, they said, look, we have the Japanese, about 20,000, who are surrendering. What do we do? And basically came down and said, well, you're going to accept the surrender, but it's unofficial. It was official, but it's unofficial.
We said, send down your most trusted officers. And they sent down some lieutenants that were very highly trusted. The lieutenants were actually the aides to the commanding generals. So the commanding generals trusted them intimately, more so than let's go to a Japanese battalion and have the battalion commander go down. The location was chosen because of the geography, and it was also easy for us to send envoys to the Japanese and work things out. So it wasn't difficult for them to get down there when we were doing the surrender. So we had the soldiers there all lined up in uniform, loaded rifles, but we also had machine guns pre-placed that came in the dark of night and surrounded that surrender area with machine guns just in case the Japanese wanted to do something. So they chose this one area, again, about 30, 35 miles north of Cebu, close to the coast, as the most likely place to have it because they had a main road, main artery there, and the Japanese didn't have to go so far to come down and meet there on that facility. We had hundreds of trucks, military trucks that came up as well. Because as soon as the Japanese surrendered, we took their arms, we searched them and everything else. They were loaded onto trucks and then drove down to Cebu City, and the boats were already there to put them on the boats and take them to Japan. And we had to have guards on those trucks because if the Filipinos got a hold of the Japanese, it would not have gone down well.
One of the generals, through an interpreter, he said, I can get the rest of these people if you let me have my sword back, because we have no authority unless we have a sword. So I said, okay, give him his sword. He went back, and that's the way it worked.
Following the end of World War II, General Arnold was only one of a handful of generals promoted during the war that retained their stars during the post-war mass demobilization. However, his most prominent post-war assignment was being the last commanding general of the United States forces in Austria.
Austria was an amazing thing. We were there from 52 to 55. Lived in a villa underneath Festung Salzburg, which was the salt capital and the fortress. Dad had 3 trains, and one was to be used to go to Vienna, because we had to go through the Soviet zone. And that one had Franz Joseph's car. Everywhere we went, Franz Joseph's car was on that one. You go through the Soviet zone and curtains were down, and you had MPs in the train. Got there, and then we'd do the change of commands, because you had the British, the French, the Americans, and the Soviets, and they would rotate command of this sectioned off Vienna, just like Berlin was later. Father did a great job there. He was very well liked. There's even now, if you go to Salzburg, you will see a General Arnold Strasse, a street named after him.
In recognition for the respected charitable and diplomatic work and services to the Austrian people, Mrs. Arnold was made a Dame Grand Cross of the Order of the Holy Scepter by the Holy See in 1955. While Lieutenant General Arnold was awarded
an honorary Austrian Grand Decoration of Honor in gold,
making him the only U.S. occupation official to receive an award by the Austrian government.
Upon their return to the United States in 1955, General Arnold was assigned as the commanding general of the United States 5th Army, based in Fort Sheridan outside of Chicago. This was his last post until he retired on January 31st, 1961.
At the time of his retirement, General Arnold received numerous decorations throughout his 37 years of service, the most notable of which are the Silver Star, Distinguished Service Medal with Oak Leaves, Legionnaire of the Legion of Merit with Oak Leaves, Honorary Officer of the French Legion of Honor, Honorary Chief Commander of the Philippine Legion of Merit,
and honorary Austrian Grand Decoration of Honor in gold.
In fact, they loved the Chicago area so much that they decided to retire there.
I really think once he retired, he was not a happy person. He no longer had what he considered challenges. He worked at the bank. He worked as a broker. He wasn't happy with them.
On August 22nd, 1976, Duke's world was forever changed when his beloved wife died of cancer. It was a broken heart that killed this pioneer spirit on September 30th, 1976.
Fortunately, his legacy lives on today. His most prized wartime possession, the sword of Lieutenant General Tadashi Katakoa, is still in the possession of his youngest son. Out of his 4 children and scores of other descendants, there have been 2 West Point graduates, 3 United States Army combat veterans, 1 Nobel laureate, 1 nationally renowned nuclear physicist, and the creator of this documentary. However, he is forever known as the man who accepted the first mass surrender of a Japanese garrison during World War II.